don't have enough clothes or the clothes of their liking, so they try to steal them or try to obtain them illegally. And all those factors mixed together leads that child to being in the back of a police car fighting with an officer on News Channel 5. And if you go on the News Channel 5 website or the Facebook or even Fox 17, lots of news outlets, you go to the comments of reports about African-American youth and some type of issue, and a lot of times they won't even have a description of what's going on. You just see an African-American child in handcuffs. All those comments and stuff, berating the child, talking about, well, they're just getting rid of the nasty blacks on the street and all that. None of those people stop and think that so many factors led up to that very moment. No one wakes up wanting to be a criminal.
Those are the challenges.
You know, when you said something about, the school administrators, a child does something in school, and they look at the behavior only and never look at the root, what could possibly be the root cause of this behavior. And when you think about it, Dr. Haney, some of the challenges that youth face today, now you're living in a community, you've grown up with another child, a few more kids or something like that, and then this child goes out and he gets killed. And then where's the counseling for that child that knew this child that got murdered out there in the street in such a horrible way? There's no counseling being provided in those situations. Now let's take, for example, somebody go in and shoot up a school, right? What do you hear? Well, we're going to bring counselors, we'll be available and stuff like that. Well, you can bring counselors in a situation like that, but when this child gets shot down here on Seaford Street somewhere in North Nashville, and there's no counseling, he sat there, he watched his friend get shot in the head, at point blank range, and now he's suffering possibly from PTSD, and nobody's offering him any counseling, and then he acts out based upon what he experienced, and then the first thing they want to look at is his behavior, but instead of looking at why is he acting like this. So, there's also another level of discrimination there. I can provide you services on one hand, but on the other hand, there are no services. You got to, deal with the best way you can. And this happens over and over and over. And I don't think a lot of people just put much attention on how that can impact and affect the thought processes of a young individual that has to experience stuff like that, Dr. Haney. And it goes on and on and on and on, and it's like a never-ending cycle. And then at the same time, you got to face the challenges of how society has painted you, young black African-American male. You have to look at how society has painted a negative picture of you, and in essence, trying to get society as a whole to be afraid of you, so that when you show up, the doors are being locked. Black people locking doors, white people locking doors, Hispanic people locking doors, Latinos locking doors, everybody locking doors when they see the black person. Everybody's distancing themselves because the media has painted this picture. Because what do I say? They only show the negative side. They don't show the positive side. And then even in showing the negative side, they still don't show the root of it. Why is this individual, why did this 12-year-old go out here and steal a car? Other than the fact that he went out there and stole a car, he's 12 years old, he shouldn't be stealing cars, and that's true, he shouldn't be stealing cars at 12-year-old. But why is he stealing cars? What is his home life like? What is he not being having access to, Dr. Haney? What things what roadblocks are being placed in his face? Maybe he was like Alana and was in school, a great student, and applied for a position, and they shot him down, and he's like, well, what's the point? I put my all into it. I did everything y'all told me to do to be successful, to make it happen. And then when I get to the point where I should be rewarded for all my efforts, I don't get rewarded. I get shot down for it. And then they put somebody in the spot that's less qualified than I am for the spot. And then where did my mind go from there? You got to look at all of that stuff, man, instead of just looking at, okay, this child, he did this, he did that. He should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law and all of that kind of stuff. Look, I believe that, and I was a criminal. I did crime, and I should have been locked up when I was locked up. They should have locked me up. They did lock me up. I'm glad they locked me up, because they hadn't locked me up, ain't no telling how my criminal mindset would have escalated during that period of time in my life. But at the same time, there are people that commit crimes, Dr. Haney, that don't need to be just locked up with the keys thrown away. They need some counseling. They need some encouragement. Why is it that, when little Johnny do something, you know, little Johnny gets to go to treatment. But when Felipe or somebody, when Felipe do something or Ray do something, they got to go to the jail. You know, and they get prosecuted for what they did. But little Johnny, he goes to a treatment center, gets shipped off to Indiana or California somewhere, go through treatment and comes back, and he's supposed to be cured and all of that stuff. You know, of course, I know that, you know, it's not true. But the thing is, this is what's happening, and this is what our youth are having to deal with, having to contend with. And then you're saying, you know, you're showing a picture that when you show me that I'm nobody, I'm nothing, then the drug dealer in the gang saying, man, you all of that and some. You know, take this package, man, go and make you some money, get paid. You know what I'm saying? You up here, you don't have anything, you're struggling, and your family may be struggling. And let me say this, there's no reason, you don't have to be poor. You do not have to be poor in the United States of America. You can overcome poverty if you want to. All you got to do, if you work hard enough, no matter what you got to deal with, no matter what the obstacle, man, I'm a formerly incarcerated individual, and I went to prison. Part of my charge in going to prison was burglary. And years later, after I was released from prison, I sold security alarm systems in Nashville, Tennessee. So, you know, you can't tell me what you can't overcome, you know what I'm saying? And I've been on this stage right here with you, Dr. Haney, sitting beside state senators and stuff like that, House representatives, people like that, you know, so I know what you can overcome if you put your effort to it, so you don't have to be living in poverty. You don't have to sit back and watch gentrification. You know, a lot of people come together, they can do like everybody else. Buy the nut. You want to change the neighborhood? Buy it. You know, buy it. Just buy the houses yourself, and then make it a low-income housing, not low-income, but medium-income housing that people can afford to move into. But, you know, but our youth, man, are suffering, man. They're going through a lot of challenges, and like I said, they don't talk about the Alana McLaughlins of the world.
Okay, and of course, let me thank the two of you for giving us that excellent information in reference to some of the problems faced by our youth. And we'll be back with our audience next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning. This this is the third show.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Someone canceled, you said?
Yeah, I had a cancellation.
Just before I came.
Just before you came.
That must be problematic when you have
and that was that space I had.
it causes, causes a lot of problems when you have that.
No, I just, just skip over it.
Yeah.
But it means that the people that are coming next have to wait longer.
Yeah.
Because we finished almost an hour ago.
Uh-huh.
And that had that other show built in.
Yeah.
When that show came, like you called me this morning.
Yeah.
I didn't know whether to, because I
Insert me, you could have.
Yeah, I didn't know to do it at that particular time.
Yeah, you could have, yeah. Do you still bring Forrest Harris in?
I haven't seen Forrest in a long time. He's over at American
Baptist. Yeah, he had so much to offer.
Oh, yeah, he does.
In terms of what's happening there and what's happening in the convention. And
yeah, what is happening over there?
in the National Baptist Convention?
Oh, yeah,
well, not a lot, to be perfectly honest with you. Not a lot, no. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, we just do African Americans and political process, and because whatever you throw in, go in the way you want to go with it,
It'll be,
Because there's a lot to be said about African Americans and the political process itself.
Yeah.
But especially the way we fit into it.
Yeah.
What we have to do.
Well, we fitted historically.
Yeah, what we have to do.
Into that, yeah.
Yeah.
So you've been doing well?
Oh, I've been doing better than that, Dr. Baldwin. I tell you, things have just Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is African Americans and the political process, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about African Americans and aspects of the political process, Dr. Lewis Baldwin. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, let me welcome you to the show this morning.
Thank you, thank you.
Again, say, as I say each time, that you've been with us so many times that it's strange not to see you when we come on. Because and I say that because you bring us such excellent information, and you've got so much information, and you've been involved in so many things, and people are excited when they talk about seeing you on with us each morning. And so I just want to say that.
Appreciate it.
As I generally say, why don't you tell us some information about your background? Who you are and whatever.
Yes. Well, I grew up in Camden, Alabama. I was born there in 1949. I attended the public schools, which were segregated at that time in Camden, Alabama, or Wilcox County, Alabama. I finished high school there in 1967. From there, I matriculated at Talladega College from 1967 to 71. And while at Talladega College in Alabama, I majored in history and minored in political science. From there to Crozer Theological Seminary in Rochester, New York, where I received the MDiv and the MA degree in Black Church History, MDiv degree in Theology. From there to Northwestern University, where I pursued and received the PhD in American Christianity in 1980. And since that time, of course, I've been involved in teaching. I've taught at Worcester College in Ohio, Colgate University in New York, and Colgate Rochester Divinity School in Rochester, New York, and more recently at Vanderbilt University. I spent almost 30 years teaching in the religious studies department at Vanderbilt University.
And Dr. Baldwin, you are a man of some education. I mean, you really covered every base, and you're well qualified in terms of the kind of information that you will bring us today. And for those few who might not know about the many publications that you've been involved in, let's use the rest of this segment to talk about your publications and some of the most significant books, articles, or whatever that you've contributed to.
Well, since 1984, I've been involved in King scholarship. I published my first article on Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr., in 1984. And since that time, I've published scores of articles and 6 books on Dr. King. I've edited 2, co-edited 2, and co-authored 2 for a total of 12 books. And in November of this year, a 13th book will come out, which I co-edited with Dr. Victor Anderson at Vanderbilt University, a book called Revives My Soul Again, The Spirituality of Martin Luther King Jr. So I've been involved since 1984 primarily in King scholarship, focusing on the cultural roots and traditions of Dr. King's, looking at the black church, looking at the African-American South, looking at other sources that we find in Southern culture and Southern history. The phenomenon of the Bible Belt, for an example, and the impact that that had on Dr. King. So this is what I've been involved in since 1984. Most of my scholarship on Dr. King.
Dr. Martin Luther King. As a matter of fact, Dr. Baldwin, I recall that the first one of our earlier shows was the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And looking back over the shows that we've done over that period, I think I must have about 4 or 5 assassination shows with you for each time, because it's such a 25, 30 years that we've been involved, and it changes, the scholarship changes so much time and time again, and you can trace the changes by the shows that you've given me dealing with Dr. Martin Luther King.
Exactly. You have to take into account these trends in King scholarship, where we deal with him in a regional context in terms of his African-American Southern background. Then you deal with his national significance and ultimately his global significance.
Very good. And of course, what we'll do, we're going to take our first commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about African Americans in the political process. And I think that that will give you an opportunity to not only deal with your King scholarship, but all of the other things that had to do with the African experience. As a matter of fact, I recall telling my granddaughter that African Americans, she said that they're not in the Constitution. I said, did you see the 3/5 clause to the Constitution? Yeah, we were there. And so what we'll do when we come back, we'll talk about that. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and the topic is African Americans and the political process. And so, Dr. Baldwin, let's see if we can start where you wish in terms of talking about black folks and slaves, African Americans, however you want to describe, Negroes or whatever you want to describe them, dealing with the political process and some of their achievements and some of their challenges dealing with that, and to say something about what is going on now in reference to the political process.
Well, I'd like to begin with the African American South, because I'm a product of the African American South. And if you go back in history and look at the late 19th century, 1865 to 1870, when the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments were passed. The 15th Amendment adopted, gave blacks the right to vote for the first time in the South. And since that time, we've been involved in one way or another in the political processes of this country. There have been struggles, even though we got the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. We know that by the time of the Civil Rights Movement, the 1950s, blacks had been pretty much disenfranchised. So there was a need on the part of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others to launch this civil rights movement in the interest of not only basic civil constitutional rights, but also in connection with that, voting rights. I happen to be a part of some of the demonstrations in my hometown, Camden, Alabama, during the voting rights struggle in 1965. So I've had a lifelong interest in blacks in politics. And I often relate that to what I'm seeing today with the coming of the midterm elections in 2018. My interest in these upcoming elections can be traced back to the time when we were fighting for voting rights and recognition as a part of the political processes of this country. So, and I'm very interested in what's happening today because I'm seeing this tendency to turn back the clock.
Good.
In this era of what we call Trumpism, President Donald J. Trump. So it's even more important that today to be involved in politics. I know in 1965 when we were fighting for voting rights, it was a very critical period in our history. But this, I think, is equally important.
More so.
Yeah, more so important because we are looking at the economy, and when you look at the economy, all of the indicators of this great economy that we are talking about really don't apply to black folk and poor people. You talk about the GNP, the stock market numbers, they don't relate to people who live from paycheck to paycheck. Studies show that 50 to 51% of Americans live from paycheck to paycheck, and it's even higher for black people. If you look at 3/4 of African Americans in this country struggle to pay their bills every month. So the economy is a major issue now. And we're struggling with some of the same issues that we struggled with in 1965. The economy was an issue at that time. Health care is an issue today. It was an issue at that time. So I think we need, as we look toward the November 2018 elections, we have to take into account the issues that confront us most prominently. Economy, health care, also the fact that a deregulation campaign is going on now that can impact our health care, where asbestos and pesticides, corporations are allowed now to do what they want with their toxic waste. And all of that impacts not only the economy, but also our health issues. So we have to be as concerned today about American politics as we were in 1965 when we were fighting for voting rights. And also 1865,
we're fighting for our freedom.
For the right to vote and the freedom.
Right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And so, in a real sense, what some of the but the basic challenge is to get African Americans to get out and vote. I mean, whatever, everything that else you might say can be settled with the number of people that you put into the political suffrage and get out and vote.
Yes, and that has been a major problem. We elected Barack Obama, the first African-American president, in 2008. Since that time, I wouldn't call it voter apathy, I would call it voter complacency. We have not gone to the polls in the numbers that we should go.
That would represent us.
Exactly. We need to vote. That's the most important thing. The other thing, we have to deal with voter intimidation and voter suppression. These are problems that we're going to have to deal with. But with the changing demographics in this country, we should have a greater impact on American politics than we are having. And the major problem is that it's voter complacency. We don't go out and vote in large numbers, and we're going to have to do that in 2018 if we wish to do what? To change this disturbing trend toward turning back the clock, not only on civil rights, but on women's rights, on health care, you name it.
Everything can be settled with the vote. I mean, if there is a key to how you solve the issue, and they used to call it a long time ago, not speaking specifically of African Americans, the Negro question.
Exactly.
That was the Negro, and the key to solving the Negro question.
Exactly.
You see, then as well as now was the vote.
The vote.
Just, I mean, it's so simple.
That's
you know,
right.
It's so simple. All people have to do is that. And there were so many ways that were used in order to what? Diminish or eliminate the vote. Talk about disfranchisement.
Exactly, because and Dr. King often said that political enfranchisement and political power is the avenue to economic empowerment. In other words, you got to begin with the political processes. That's still true. If you don't vote the right people into office, at the executive branch, the legislative branch, then you have no way out. You gotta vote. And political power is very important as an avenue to increasing economic power.
And it's so difficult to find and to convince people, not only African Americans, but all people. It's so difficult to convince them of the importance and the need to vote, no matter what party you're voting for, to vote.
Yes, but I think we're seeing a changing trend here, because if you look at the election of Doug Jones in Alabama.
Okay, I tell you, we're going to take our final commercial break, and then we'll stop. We'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and he's given us some information in reference to the political process and some of the challenges in the political process, especially for the African American. And of course, what we say about the African American, Doctor, I think we can say about other members of society, because black folks are not the only group that are not voting.
You can say it about Hispanics and other ethnic and racial groups.
That's right.
They're all facing the same challenges with respect to the economy, with respect to preserving the norms and institutions of democracy in these times. You're talking essentially the same thing.
That's right, and it all depends upon what the vote, you see. And let's talk about some of the efforts at disfranchisement and gerrymandering.
Well, we've seen that over the years, not only voter intimidation and voter suppression in many ways, gerrymandering, which has to do with the redistricting processes, which put blacks at a disadvantage in terms of their voting and political power. We have to deal with those kinds of challenges. But the important thing is to register and vote in large numbers. Too many of us, as I said earlier, about voter complacency, and in some cases, voter apathy. But we got to try to overcome these, they're not insurmountable challenges. We got to try to overcome them, and go out and vote. We didn't do it after Obama left. We voted during the Obama years. We voted in 2008.
And that's right.
We voted in 2012 in large numbers, unprecedented numbers. But since 2012, 2016, we didn't show up. Okay. 2018, hopefully we've been inspired by what we've seen in the last couple of years to go out and vote. But that's the key to democracy. If you don't vote, you don't have a voice. If you don't vote, you can't determine what is the future of this country. And I think that is the challenge today. Fortunately, we have black women who have come out, and if you know Doug Jones' election a couple of years ago as senator in Alabama, it happened because 98% of black women voted for him.
Good.
This is the year of the black woman in politics. Look at Stacey Abrams in Georgia. Look at Ayanna Pressley in Massachusetts. She's going to be the representative, the first African-American representative for the state of Massachusetts. Hopefully, Stacey Abrams will be the first governor, black woman governor of Georgia. You have, Andrew Gillum running for governor in Florida. Okay, you have Ben Jealous running for governor in Maryland. So we have all of these African-American candidates who are getting into the political processes because they understand that these processes have not worked for black people and poor people and other minorities. So the important thing is to be inspired, not only to vote yourself, but to inspire other people to vote.
And so that's the real challenge. Of course, that's the same challenge that we've faced since the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You know, it's always trying to convince that wayward uncle, a brother, a cousin, while everybody else is going to vote, they don't go to vote. You know, they didn't vote this time, and we have I know so many of those in my own family group and et cetera. And I think that those are the ones that we have to convince this time, who will say that it doesn't matter if you don't vote. Vote really doesn't matter.
My grandmother, Fannie Bell Baldwin, in 1965, she only lived 3 years later, died in 68. I have a picture of her at the polls registering to vote. She couldn't write her name. But Fannie Bell Baldwin voted. And she always inspired her children and grandchildren to go out and vote because she understood the importance of it. If she, uneducated, totally uneducated, if she could understand it.
Uneducated according to the books.
But to the books.
She had
she had common sense. She had mother wit.
A world of knowledge.
She had wisdom. She had mother wit. She had common sense. And she understood the importance of political power for the black community. And if she could, those of us who have gone to elementary school and high school, and some of us to college and graduate school, we should understand that if we don't have political power, you don't have any other kind of power. Because economic power, intellectual power, all of these forms of power are related in some way to the way you handle politics.
And the people who are representing you in the government itself. And I think that through all the periods of the American history experience, when Africans were represented well in the government, when they voted, Reconstruction, what would Reconstruction be without African-American political participants?
And I think African-Americans at that time were more conscious of the importance of voting and participating in the political process. They had been in slavery for generations, and they walked to the polls, miles to vote. You know, and they understood, and they had a better perception than many of us have today about the need to just devote yourself to what's going on in terms of the political life of this country. You know, and that's sad to say that back in the late 18th century, many of our forefathers were more perceptive than many of us are today.
They were so close to slavery itself.
Exactly.
And if anything they understood was what? slavery.
Yes, and the need to secure power.
That's right.
And representation.
Yeah, and
they understood that. Never any question
That's
about
right.
it.
And I think that was the fire that led many of those to get out and participate and to change in a real sense. Black folks sitting in the state legislatures, black folks in the government itself, and except for the first time.
And they had to face the threat of lynching, the threat of castration. They had to face so many threats of being murdered.
That's right.
For simply showing up at the vote.
That's right.
And yet they went. And here we are. We can live next door to voting places and don't go.
Don't go. Don't have time to vote.
It's a shame.
Yeah,
it's
it is.
Shameful.
And I think that some of the things that you're saying now, Dr. Baldwin, I think might have an inspiration in terms of trying to get African Americans to get everybody out to participate in the suffrage. And you know, if you get everybody out, the African American will have to come out in terms of political participation.
Think about what your grandmother and your great grandmother would think. The struggles that they had to go through.
And that we're all in this together. And nobody is above the struggle.
Exactly.
That's right.
And we're living in unprecedented times, troubled times.
That's right, troubled times.
And there's a tendency to turn back the clock to those periods in the dark age in this country.
A strike at democracy itself.
Exactly.
You know, I mean,
it's being challenged.
That's right.
It's being undermined.
There's a real effort to undermine the democratic system itself. No matter where you sit or where you look at it, that's going on.
There's an assault on the judiciary, there's an assault on the intelligence community.
That's right.
An assault on the FBI, on the free press. And if we are interested at all in preserving democracy, which is very important for black people and all Americans.
That's right. That's right. We can't do well without democracy.
No,
you know, democracy takes us back to slavery.
Yeah, if we lose democracy, we're going to be the ones who hurt most.
That's right, because that's exactly it. And so, you know, we've got about a minute here, Doctor, but I think you've mentioned the November election, the midterm elections are being, say something about that over the last minute.
Yes, I think that a lot is being done now in terms of organizing, going door to door, getting the vote out. And I think we'll be able to pull off, you know, a democratic blue wave if we go out and vote. We don't have the money. If you look at what's happening in Maryland, for an example, with Ben Jealous running against the incumbent governor, Larry Hogan. Hogan has 24 times the money that Ben Jealous has. So we can't match the Republicans in money, these powerful forces who control the government. But if we work hard, going door to door, inspiring our relatives and our friends to vote, we can pull this off. The important thing, of course, is getting people to understand that we're at a difficult time in our history, and that if we don't vote, we could very well lose not only democracy, we could lose our nation.
Very good. And of course, let me thank you, Dr. Baldwin, and let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.
All right.
I should have had me a cup of water.
Yeah. Did you drink all that right there?
Well, yeah, I did. Got a piece of paper in. Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is microaggression and African Americans in America. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about microaggression Dr. E.K. Sanford from Tennessee State University. Now, Dr. Sanford, let me not only welcome you to the show this morning, but to tell you how delighted we are to have you here and to know that our audience know you well, because we've had you on many shows and you've given us such excellent information. And so what I'd like for you to do is to give us some information in reference to your background and some other things so that we might be able to get this show started for today.
And I thank you so much, Dr. Haynes. It's always a pleasure to be here. And when I come, I'm always excited to come, and it's a great pleasure. As you said, I'm Dr. E. Kelly Sanford, Professor of Sociology at Tennessee State University. And I did my postdoc education at the Pennsylvania State University in State College, Pennsylvania, looking at gerontology. I also did my doctoral program work at Howard University in Washington, D.C., where I looked at the homeless elderly. But some of my specialized areas while there was in race and ethnic relations, was in Africana studies, social stratification, and gerontology. Prior to that, I worked while I was working on my doctorate degree, and I'm always excited to say this to give the listening audience some idea of how to apply sociology, what we'll be doing today, at the national headquarters of the American Red Cross, where we had a very vital and important program on HIV/AIDS education in America. As a matter of fact, the United States Congress and the Centers for Disease Control sponsored that program, and I was the assistant to the evaluation unit there at the American Red Cross, Washington, D.C. Likewise, NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, I worked with that organization for several years while completing my doctorate degree, and I would be remiss not to say that I'm originally from North Carolina, attended North Carolina Central University, as well as University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the University of Michigan.
You know, Dr. Sanford, this topic, microaggression, is a new topic to me.
Yes.
And certainly my audience might not know anything about it, because this is the first time we've had an opportunity to deal with the topic as such.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I like about you is that as a sociologist, you're able to bring us new terms and new ideas. And the idea of microaggression among the population in reference to African Americans was sort of a new topic to me.
Yes.
So let's talk about microaggression and how it fits into the general theme of sociology.
Okay, well, thank you again so much. Dr. Bedford, and I was on her dissertation at Tennessee State University, and both of us have this very strong relationship in looking at race and ethnic relations in America. Sexism, genderism, racism, biases toward LGBTQ community, or any type of bias that might exist. So microaggression is simply a subtle comment. It could be a very subtle, unconscious, unaware notion that you might have toward another person. Usually it's a minority group such as African Americans or other minority groups or LGBTQ populations. And it's a certain type of a prejudice that is really unconscious, is unintentional in many instances, this microaggression. But the behavior, the expression, the action is very much present. In many instances, the person, him or herself, that does this, they don't realize that they've done it. And so this is what kind of made it very interesting when you and I had an informal conversation about it, because it, for an example, could be just a person that might be highly educated. They may be in line waiting to be served the next or to use their credit card, and everyone was treated a certain way. And this individual might treat that individual because of what they might see, that person's skin pigmentation, or that they have this difference, and unconsciously, they might then have a gesture or an action that's very stereotypical or prejudicial. And what I wanted to do today was try to link this invisible type of unconscious action into a historical perspective. And this is what we've been doing a number of times on the program before. And I'll be brief. We all know the story. We won't have to go all of the details through it. But when you have a society that was created on hundreds of years of enslavement, and those thoughts and patterns are ingrained in the very fabric of the culture of that society about another group, to the point that the institution of the laws have actually done something to that group.
Very good. And so what we'll do, we'll take our first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. The topic is microaggression and African Americans in the United States. And of course, Dr. Sanford has already given us some information in reference to an identification of microaggression. And Doctor, what I'd like for you to do, since it's such a new term to me, is to elaborate upon that and give our audience who might have missed that first segment some additional information in reference to this topic, microaggression. Okay,
yes, microaggression is simply a social, psychological, sociological term that really is simple. It just refers to and defined as comments, someone's actions, someone's thought patterns that are unconscious. They are not really in the front aspect of their thinking process, but it is an action that is very prejudiced toward another group. That group could be African Americans or any other minority group or LGBTQ. But it's this unconscious thought, this unconscious action that may occur based on the prejudice.
It's a very subtle kind.
That's right. Yeah, a very subtle. And if you are part of that minority group, that subtle is really vibrant. It is really something that you pick up on. However, the individual that does it will say, well, pardon me, oh, I didn't do that. It's unconscious. They don't realize that they are doing it. So one could be in communication with someone else and they could be acting in a very microaggressive way toward you, and that individual that receives it leaves and wonders, well, my goodness, I don't know why they are acting or treating me, or why did they treat me that way? That other person because it was unconscious, they would not feel like they did it at all. So right before the break, I was trying to indicate to you, how did this come a part of the culture, the very language, the very traits in America? And we have to link it back to hundreds of years of enslavement that led into the very fabric of our society and the institution of the law, where, and we have mentioned this on the show before, when the Constitution mentioned life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it wasn't for those people of African descent or women or any other minority. If you just think about Native Americans, so-called Indians were already here, that was not for that group of people. So these microaggressions, even at that earlier time, entered into the subconscious of groups of people that was passed down. Culture means passed down from one generation to the next generation to the next generation to